Abandoned mail-order bride sat on a crate at the station. Unaware the cowboy was coming for her, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the dusty town in shades of orange and gold. The small train station was quiet, almost empty, except for the occasional traveler hurrying to catch their train or waving goodbye to a friend. Amidst the gentle hum of the tracks and the soft creak of the wooden benches, a young woman sat on a weathered crate, clutching a small leather satchel close to her chest. Her name was Clara, and her hands trembled slightly as she watched the tracks, hoping and praying that the train had brought the man she was supposed to marry. She had traveled a long way, hundreds of miles from a place she barely knew, leaving behind the life she had always known. Clara had agreed to become a mail-order bride, a decision made out of necessity, out of hope, and out of a deep desire for stability in a world that often seemed cold and unkind. The letters she had exchanged with him had seemed promising. His words were kind, filled with polite admiration and the promise of a new life together. He had described a home, a small plot of land, and a life that promised safety and respect. Clara had allowed herself to believe in that life, dreaming of the day she would arrive and finally meet the man who had promised her a future. But now, as the hours passed and the shadows grew longer, hope began to twist into fear. The train had come and gone, leaving nothing but a trail of dust behind it. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at the station clock again. She had arrived early, as the letter had instructed, giving herself time to rest and prepare, but the man had not come. Not yet, not at all. The idea that she had been forgotten, abandoned even, began to settle like a heavy stone in her chest. Around her, the station hummed with life, but she felt completely alone. Travelers moved past her, some giving curious glances, others too busy with their own affairs to notice the anxious young woman sitting on a crate. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the tracks, willing herself to see his face among the crowd. But no matter how hard she tried, she saw nothing but strangers hurrying past, their faces filled with indifference. Her thoughts began to spiral. What if something had happened to him? What if he had changed his mind? The letters had promised so much, yet here she was, abandoned in a town she had never visited, with no friends, no family, and no idea where to turn next. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel, as if holding onto it could somehow anchor her to the hope that had brought her here. She had been careful with her plans, following every instruction, traveling exactly as she had been told, yet it seemed that all her effort had been in vain. The station itself seemed to mirror her feelings. The wooden boards beneath her were worn and uneven, creaking under her slight weight as if they too carried the story of neglect. The benches, empty and sun-bleached, were reminders that people came and went, often leaving without notice or care. A cool breeze blew through the open windows of the station, carrying with it the faint scent of the surrounding desert and the smell of old wood and coal. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the chill of the late afternoon air. As she waited, her mind wandered back to the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the long train rides, the quiet hours spent staring out the window at rolling hills and endless stretches of land. She remembered the faces of strangers in the compartments, some kind and friendly, others indifferent or suspicious. Each mile had taken her further from home, and yet closer to the life she had imagined. She had told herself that this adventure would be worth it, that the fear and uncertainty would fade the moment she met the man who had promised her a future. But that moment never came. And now, sitting on the crate in the fading light, Clara felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was a stranger in a town that barely acknowledged her existence. The people who passed by whispered softly among themselves, some with pity, others with curiosity. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her, questioning why she was there and what had brought her to such a vulnerable position. Clara lowered her gaze, unwilling to meet their eyes, trying to make herself invisible. Hours stretched on, and the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the station platform. Clara's stomach growled with hunger, reminding her that she had not eaten since the train ride that morning. She considered standing and looking for a place to eat, but her feet were tired, her mind weary. She had hoped to arrive and immediately find a home, a place to belong, but instead she was trapped in uncertainty, her plans unraveling with each passing moment. Her thoughts turned to the letters she had received from him. Each one had been carefully written, filled with promises and reassurances. He had spoken of a life together, of building a home and sharing quiet evenings after a day's work. Clara had clung to those words, believing in them with every fiber of her being. But now, in the glaring light of reality, those words felt distant and hollow. She had allowed herself to dream, and those dreams had led her here, to an empty platform and a growing sense of abandonment. Clara shifted on the crate, trying to find a more comfortable position, but nothing could ease the tight knot in her chest. She looked around the station, hoping for some sign, some clue that he might still come. The tracks stretched endlessly in both directions, a reminder of the long journey she had undertaken and the uncertainty of the future that lay ahead. Each passing minute seemed heavier than the last, the weight of disappointment pressing down on her until it felt almost unbearable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and purple, Clara's hope began to fade. She considered leaving, finding a place to stay for the night, but the thought of walking through the town alone, without anyone to guide or protect her, filled her with dread. She felt trapped, caught between the dream she had chased and the harsh reality that had met her. In that moment, Clara realized just how vulnerable she was. She had come to this town with nothing but her courage and her belief in the promises she had been given. Now, she sat on a crate in a strange place, unsure of who she could trust or where she could turn. The shadows lengthened, and the station grew quieter, the last travelers disappearing into the night. Clara's heart ached with the realization that she might be entirely alone. Yet, despite the fear and despair, a small part of her refused to give up. She held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would still arrive. She tightened her grip on the leather strap of her satchel, whispering a silent prayer that the letters had not been lies, that the man who had promised her a life together would appear before it was too late. The night began to settle over the town, the stars appearing one by one in the deepening sky. Clara remained on the crate, her eyes fixed on the tracks, listening for the distant whistle of a train or the sound of approaching footsteps. She did not know what the future held, and she did not know if the man she had come for would ever arrive. All she knew was that she had taken a leap of faith, and now she had to wait, hoping that her courage would not be in vain. And so she sat, silent and still, on the old wooden crate, the last light of day fading from the station. The wind whispered softly through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of distant lands and the faint promise of change. Clara's heart beat with a mixture of fear and hope, her mind racing with questions and doubts, yet holding on to the fragile thread of belief that tomorrow might bring the answer she longed for. The night grew darker, and the station became a quiet, lonely place. Clara's eyes never left the tracks, and her hands never let go of the satchel that contained the few belongings she had brought with her. Somewhere out there in the wide and wild world, the man she had come to meet might still be on his way, and in her heart she held onto that possibility, fragile but alive. As the moon rose high over the town, casting a silver light across the platform, Clara leaned back on the crate, exhausted but unwilling to leave. The station was silent now, save for the soft creak of the wooden boards and the distant hoot of an owl. She felt the weight of the long journey settle into her bones, the mix of fear, loneliness, and hope intertwining within her. And though she did not know what the night would bring, she refused to give up, refusing to let despair take her entirely. Clara sat on the crate, waiting, hoping, and dreaming, unaware that her life was on the brink of change. Somewhere beyond the horizon, someone had taken notice of her plight, someone who would come into her life and alter it forever. But for now, she was alone, a young woman in a strange town, clinging to courage and the faintest glimmer of hope, as the stars shimmered above and the world held its breath around her. Clara woke the next morning with a heavy heart. The cold night had not brought the comfort she had hoped for. She sat on the same crate at the station, the wooden surface still rough beneath her, her fingers brushing the worn edges as if they could somehow anchor her to reality. The town was waking slowly, the faint sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and a horse's clip-clop blending into the background. She wondered where she would go from here. The man she had come for had not appeared. She realized painfully that she could not rely on him, not anymore. She stood, brushing the dust from her simple dress, and glanced down the main street of the small town. The buildings were modest, weathered by the sun and wind, but they held life within them. A general store had just opened its door, and the smell of bread and coffee drifted toward her. Clara hesitated, unsure if she had the courage to enter. pride and fear tangled in her chest. She had nowhere to go, yet the thought of facing strangers alone made her feel exposed and small. Hunger gnawed at her, and she knew she had to act. She walked slowly, each step uncertain, as though the ground itself might betray her. The general store was simple and welcoming, filled with the chatter of townspeople discussing their daily lives. Clara stepped inside, her eyes wide with cautious hope. She approached the counter, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flower-streaked hands looked up from arranging goods. "Good morning, miss. Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice warm and gentle. Clara hesitated. I'm looking for work, or maybe a place to stay." "I just arrived in town." Her voice wavered, betraying the fear she tried to hide. The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, we could use some help at the diner across the street. It's not much, but it's honest work. You can start today if you like." Relief and gratitude surged through Clara. She nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you. I'll do my best." The diner was small, with a few wooden tables and a counter lined with stools. The smell of frying bacon and fresh bread filled the air, comforting and strange at the same time. Clara was introduced to the cook, a cheerful man named Henry, who explained the simple tasks: washing dishes, clearing tables, and keeping the place tidy. Clara threw herself into the work, finding temporary comfort in the rhythm of her hands and the warmth of the kitchen. For a few hours, she could forget the emptiness of the station and the man who had abandoned her. Still, the whispers and curious glances from other townspeople made her uneasy. She noticed them when she stepped outside to fetch water or deliver supplies. Some seemed genuinely interested, others merely amused or judgmental. Clara felt their eyes on her, and though she tried to ignore it, she could not fully escape the feeling of being an outsider. Each glance reminded her that she was alone, that she had no one in this town but herself. Days passed slowly. Clara learned to navigate the town, familiarizing herself with the shops, the streets, and the quiet routines of its people. She began to save a little money from her work at the diner, careful to spend only on necessities. She found a small boarding room above the store, simple but safe, with a thin mattress and a clean blanket. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was a start. Despite the small victories, fear and uncertainty never fully left her. She still returned to the station in the evenings, sitting on the same crate where she had first waited, her eyes searching the horizon for any sign of the man who had promised her a future. Each train that passed without him tightened the knot of disappointment in her chest. Sometimes she cried quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks as she pressed her face into her hands, feeling the weight of rejection and isolation. Clara began to reflect on her journey and the choices that had brought her here. She thought about the letters, the promises, and the hope that had guided her across hundreds of miles. She realized that she had been brave to take such a risk, that courage had carried her here, even if the outcome was not what she had expected. Slowly, she began to understand that her strength did not depend on anyone else. Her survival depended on her own determination and resourcefulness. She practiced small acts of independence. She learned to manage her money, making sure she could afford food, clothing, and rent. She took note of the townspeople who were kind and trustworthy, forming quiet connections with a few who treated her with respect. She learned to carry herself with confidence, even when her heart trembled with doubt. Each day brought new challenges, but Clara faced them with a quiet resolve that surprised even herself. The diner became her anchor. She spent her mornings preparing meals, cleaning tables, and assisting customers, and her afternoons exploring the town, looking for ways to make her life more secure. She discovered the rhythm of daily life in a small western town, the clatter of the blacksmith, the laughter of children playing near the town square, the occasional rider passing through on horseback. These small routines gave her a sense of belonging, even if fleeting, and reminded her that the world still held kindness and familiarity. Clara's evenings were often the hardest. She returned to the station, sitting on her crate and staring at the tracks, her mind wandering to the man who had abandoned her. She wondered where he was, whether he had changed his mind, or whether he had ever intended to come at all. She battled feelings of anger, fear, and despair, but she also clung to hope. The possibility that someone might come for her remained, fragile and faint, yet persistent. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Clara noticed movement in the distance. Dust rose along the horizon, and the faint outline of a horse appeared. Her heart leapt and her hands trembled. Could it be him? She held her breath, squinting against the fading light. But as the rider approached, Clara felt a flicker of caution. She did not know this person, and the world had taught her to be wary. The rider drew closer, the sun glinting off his wide-brimmed hat and leather boots. He dismounted with ease, his posture confident yet not threatening. He walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel of the platform. Clara's heart raced, a mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity swirling inside her. She did not move, waiting to see what this stranger would do. The man stopped a few feet away, tipping his hat in greeting. "Miss Clara?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. "I've been looking for you." Clara's eyes widened. She did not recognize him, but something in his tone suggested honesty. I'm Clara," she replied cautiously. Are you the man I'm supposed to meet?" The man shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, ma'am, I'm not him. But I heard about your situation, and I wanted to make sure you were safe." Confusion and relief mingled inside Clara. She did not know this man, yet he had come to check on her, to ensure she was unharmed. It was a kindness she had not expected, and it stirred something deep within her, a sense that the world was not entirely cruel, that there were still people willing to help without expectation. The man introduced himself as Jack, a local cowboy who had heard of her abandonment. He explained that he had been keeping an eye on the town and the travelers who passed through, and when he learned of her arrival, he had decided to make sure she was all right. Clara listened, her heart slowly opening to the possibility of trust. She realized that while the man she had come for had failed her, there were others who could offer protection and guidance, even in small ways. Over the next few days, Jack checked in on her. Sometimes he brought supplies or helped with errands. Other times he offered advice about the town and its people. Clara began to rely on his quiet presence, finding comfort in the fact that someone cared about her well-being. She did not yet fully trust him, but she appreciated the small gestures, the subtle reassurance that she was not entirely alone. Through these interactions, Clara learned valuable lessons about resilience and self-reliance. She discovered that she could face fear and uncertainty with courage, that she could take control of her own life even when circumstances seemed bleak. Each day brought challenges, but also small victories: earning a wage, securing a safe place to sleep, forming tentative friendships, and navigating a town that had once felt overwhelming. Clara's journey had begun with hope and disappointment, but now it was evolving into something deeper. She was learning that survival was not only about waiting for someone else to rescue her, but about finding strength within herself. She began to recognize her own resilience, the quiet determination that had carried her this far, and the potential for a life shaped by her own choices rather than the promises of others. And yet, even as she grew stronger and more independent, Clara could not completely let go of hope. The possibility that someone might still arrive, someone who would change her circumstances for the better, remained a fragile but persistent thread in her heart. She had learned to face the world with courage, but she had not lost the longing for connection, for companionship, and for the promise of a future filled with respect and safety. As Clara sat on her crate at the station one evening, watching the sky darken and the stars emerge, she felt a quiet determination settle within her. She had faced abandonment, fear, and uncertainty, and she had survived. She had learned to navigate a town that had initially seemed hostile, to earn her own way, and to recognize the kindness of those who offered it without expectation. She had discovered her own strength, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, she was no longer a passive observer of her life. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the unknown future awaited her. Clara knew that challenges would continue to arise, that fear and uncertainty would not vanish entirely. But she had found a way to endure, to keep moving forward, and to hold on to hope even in the darkest moments. And in that, she found a sense of empowerment and purpose that she had never known before. The town was quiet in the early morning, the soft golden light of sunrise touching the rooftops and casting long shadows along the dusty streets. Clara stood near the diner, brushing flour from her hands, her heart still heavy from the memories of the man who had abandoned her. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the town, but even so, the mornings brought with them a renewed sense of vulnerability. Each day was a careful balance between hope and fear, trust and caution. She had seen Jack almost every day now. He had become a silent presence in her life, watching over her from a distance, offering help when needed but never intruding. At first, she had been wary, unsure if she could trust anyone after being left alone and humiliated at the station. But his consistent kindness, quiet patience, and unassuming strength had begun to break down the walls she had built around herself. Still, Clara was cautious. She knew that trust was earned, and she was determined not to give it lightly. This morning, as she arranged plates and glasses on the counter, she noticed movement outside the diner. A cloud of dust rose from the main street, and the unmistakable figure of a rider appeared on horseback. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the confident stride of the horse, the steady rhythm of the hooves striking the ground. She felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. Could this be someone important? Her mind raced with possibilities, and she felt the familiar tension of uncertainty tighten in her chest. The rider dismounted gracefully, adjusting the wide brim of his hat. His boots clicked on the wooden planks of the sidewalk as he approached the diner. Clara's stomach twisted nervously, but she remained calm, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The man's eyes met hers, and she felt a strange sense of recognition, though she could not place it immediately. "Good morning, Miss Clara," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I hope I'm not intruding." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Good morning, and no, you're not." I wasn't expecting anyone." He offered a small, polite smile. "I understand. I wanted to make sure you were doing well. It's not easy arriving in a new place without anyone to rely on." Clara's chest tightened. He spoke with such ease, yet she sensed an honesty in his words that made her feel safe. "I'm getting by," she admitted quietly. "It's been hard, but I'm learning. I have work at the diner and a small room to stay in. It's not much, but it's something." The man nodded, his eyes gentle but attentive. "I'm glad to hear that. Still, I want you to know that you don't have to face all of this alone. If you ever need help or even just someone to talk to, I'm here." Clara felt a flutter of warmth in her chest, a strange mix of relief and hesitation. She had spent so long alone, learning to survive, that the idea of relying on someone else felt both comforting and frightening. But there was something about him, steady, calm, reliable, that inspired a cautious trust. She decided to take a small step forward. "Thank you," she said softly. I appreciate that. It means a lot." He tipped his hat politely. "Call me Jack. I'll be around if you need me." And with that, he mounted his horse and rode slowly down the main street, the dust curling around his boots as he went. Clara watched him leave, her mind racing with thoughts. She didn't yet understand why, but she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known since the day she had arrived at the station. Over the next few days, Jack became a consistent presence. He would appear when Clara was performing errands, offering guidance or quietly helping her navigate difficult situations. Sometimes he would bring supplies, a loaf of bread, fresh milk, or small gifts from the town that reminded her of home. Clara began to see him not just as a stranger, but as someone she could rely on, someone who would protect her without demanding anything in return. Despite this growing trust, Clara remained wary. She remembered the man who had abandoned her, and she knew that the world could be cruel. Jack's kindness was a welcome light in her life, but she was careful not to depend too heavily on it. Still, she found herself looking forward to his visits, the brief conversations they shared, and the reassurance his presence brought. One afternoon, Clara was walking to the station to collect her thoughts when she noticed a group of townspeople gathered near the square. Whispers and murmurs floated through the air, carrying a tension she could feel in her bones. Curiosity and caution warred within her as she approached, keeping her distance. She could see that they were discussing something, or someone, but the details were unclear. Jack appeared suddenly, riding swiftly to her side. "Clara, stay back," he said, his voice low but urgent. "It's nothing you need to involve yourself in. Let me handle it." Clara nodded, her pulse quickening. She trusted him, but the fear of being thrust into another humiliating or dangerous situation made her stomach churn. Jack dismounted and walked toward the group, his presence commanding attention without aggression. The townspeople parted slightly, allowing him to speak to their leader in a firm, calm tone. Clara watched from a distance, heart pounding. Jack's calm confidence and quiet authority were impressive. He handled the situation with care, ensuring that the matter did not escalate, and soon the crowd began to disperse. When it was over, he returned to her side, brushing dust from his coat. "Everything's fine," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." Clara exhaled slowly, relief flooding her. She realized with a mix of gratitude and admiration that Jack's presence brought safety, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense as well. He offered a steady hand in a world that had been uncertain and harsh, and she found herself leaning on that steadiness more than she expected. In the evenings, Clara and Jack would sometimes walk together along the quiet streets, sharing small stories and observing the town as it settled into night. These moments were brief but meaningful. Clara began to open up about her past, the journey she had taken, and the man who had failed to meet her. Jack listened without judgment, offering quiet encouragement and understanding. "You've been through a lot," he said one evening, the orange glow of the setting sun lighting his face. "But you're strong, Clara. I've seen the way you handle yourself, the way you face challenges without giving up. That takes courage." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the first time someone had acknowledged her strength without pity or expectation. I try," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "It hasn't been easy. I've had to learn to rely on myself, and sometimes I feel like I'm still just surviving, not really living." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Survival is important, but so is finding moments to live, to feel safe and cared for. You deserve that, Clara. More than you realize." As the days turned into weeks, Clara's confidence grew. She became more adept at her work, more comfortable navigating the town, and more willing to accept small gestures of kindness from those around her. Yet she remained aware of the fragility of trust. The memory of abandonment lingered, reminding her to tread carefully, even as she allowed herself to hope. One late afternoon, Clara returned to the station, her thoughts heavy with the events of the day. She sat on her crate, staring down the tracks as the sun dipped behind the hills. The warm glow of twilight painted the town in soft shades of pink and purple, and a gentle breeze stirred the dust around her feet. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to breathe, to feel the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. When she opened them again, she saw movement on the horizon. A figure was riding slowly toward the station, kicking up dust in the fading light. Clara's heart skipped a beat, and she held her breath. She could not yet tell who it was, but her instincts told her that it was important. The anticipation, the hope, and the fear mingled inside her, creating a tension that made every heartbeat feel loud in the stillness of the evening. The rider approached steadily, and as he drew closer, Clara's eyes widened. It was Jack. He dismounted with ease, a familiar calm in his movements. "Evening, Clara," he said, tipping his hat politely. "I thought I'd check in before the sun fully set. There's something I need to tell you." Clara's curiosity and anxiety rose in equal measure. She nodded, her hands gripping the edges of the crate. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack smiled gently. "It's about your past and about making sure you're safe going forward. You've handled yourself well, Clara, but there are things you should know. The man who abandoned you, he might still have connections in town. Nothing dangerous yet, but it's best to be cautious. I'll help you every step of the way." Clara felt a shiver run through her. She had been strong, careful, and independent, but the reminder of potential danger made her realize how much she had relied on Jack's quiet presence without fully acknowledging it. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty and concern, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to relax slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack tipped his hat again, a small, reassuring gesture. "You've done most of this yourself, Clara. I'm just here to make sure you're not alone. You've proven your strength, and I'll make Sue." The morning sun rose slowly over the small town, casting a warm glow over the dusty streets. Clara woke early, as she had done for weeks now, carrying a quiet sense of purpose. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the town, the gentle clatter of the blacksmith at work, the hum of conversation at the diner, and the distant sound of hooves on the main street. But today felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a subtle tension that made her heart beat a little faster. She dressed quickly, smoothing the wrinkles from her simple dress and tying her hair neatly. Her room above the store was modest but comfortable, a place she had learned to call home. It had been a long journey, from the train station to fear and abandonment to small victories and cautious trust. And now, after weeks of struggle, she felt ready to face the day with more confidence than ever. Clara stepped outside and walked toward the diner, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. The morning was quiet, the town slowly waking. Jack was already there, tending to his horse near the edge of the street. He looked up and smiled, tipping his hat in greeting. His presence had become a source of reassurance for Clara, a steadying force in a world that had once felt uncertain and hostile. "Good morning, Clara," Jack said warmly. "Ready for the day?" Clara nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Yes, I think I am." They walked together toward the diner, the rhythm of their steps matching the gentle pulse of the town. Clara had learned to enjoy these moments, the quiet companionship, and the sense that she was no longer completely alone. Jack's presence was calm and protective, never overbearing but always reassuring. She trusted him, not blindly, but with a careful awareness that he had proven himself trustworthy. As they entered the diner, the familiar smells of cooking and fresh bread greeted Clara. She took her place behind the counter, moving with practiced efficiency. Customers began to arrive, chatting with each other, and Clara found herself immersed in the daily life of the town. It was not the life she had imagined when she had first left home, but it was a life she was beginning to embrace, a life she could shape for herself. Mid-morning, a messenger arrived at the diner, a young boy with a letter in hand. He looked nervous as he approached Clara. "Miss Clara, this came for you," he said, holding out the envelope. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and a flicker of fear passed through her. Could it be from the man who had abandoned her? She hesitated before opening it, drawing a deep breath to steady her nerves. The letter contained news that confirmed her fears. The man she had once trusted was in town, and he had enemies, people who had grievances from past dealings, people who could pose a threat if she were not careful. Clara felt a cold shiver run through her. She had hoped he would be a distant memory, but now reality forced her to confront the possibility that danger still lingered, tied to the man who had abandoned her. She looked up, meeting Jack's eyes. He had been standing nearby, quietly observing. His expression was serious but calm, as if he had anticipated this. "We'll handle this together," he said firmly. "You don't need to face it alone." Clara nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude and trust. She had learned to rely on herself, yes, but she also recognized the value of having someone by her side, someone strong, dependable, and compassionate. With Jack's help, she felt capable of facing whatever came next. They spent the next few hours preparing. Jack spoke with the townspeople who might offer assistance, ensuring that Clara would have allies and a safe place if things turned dangerous. Clara herself moved with determination, securing her room, organizing her belongings, and preparing for the possibility of confrontation. She felt the fear in her chest, but she refused to let it control her. She had learned courage through experience, and now she would use it to protect herself and take charge of her life. By late afternoon, the man who had abandoned Clara arrived in town. He was not a threatening figure by appearance, but his presence alone carried tension and uncertainty. Clara's heart pounded as she saw him, a mixture of anger, fear, and defiance rising within her. She did not speak immediately, instead watching him carefully, assessing his intentions and preparing for what might come. Jack remained at her side, a quiet, steadying presence. He did not push her or take control, but his calm confidence gave her strength. She realized in that moment that she was no longer the vulnerable young woman who had sat on a crate at the station weeks ago. She had grown stronger, more self-reliant, and capable of facing challenges head-on. The man approached cautiously, perhaps aware of the eyes and whispers of the townspeople around him. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was clear, steady, and calm. "I trusted you once," she said. "You abandoned me. You left me alone in a town I did not know. I will not allow fear or your presence to control my life anymore." The man looked taken aback. He had expected something different, fear, submission, perhaps even a plea for mercy. Instead, he saw a young woman who had endured hardship, learned to survive, and discovered her own strength. Clara continued, her eyes unwavering. "Whatever problems you have, they are not mine. I will not be part of them. I am done waiting for someone to rescue me. I will protect myself and build my own life." Her words carried weight, and the townspeople around them took notice. Whispers of admiration spread quietly through the crowd. Clara's courage, her ability to stand firm in the face of someone who had wronged her, inspired respect. She felt a sense of empowerment she had never known before, a realization that her strength was hers alone, not dependent on anyone else. Jack stepped forward slightly, offering silent support. He did not speak for her, but his presence reinforced the message that Clara was not alone. Together, They created a barrier of safety and confidence, making it clear that no harm would come to her while they were present. The man, seeing that his power over Clara had evaporated, retreated. He left the town quietly, disappearing into the horizon, leaving behind a sense of relief and closure. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the tension of weeks of fear and uncertainty finally easing. She had confronted the past, faced her fears, and emerged stronger than before. That evening, Clara returned to her crate at the station, not out of fear or expectation, but as a symbol of reflection and resilience. She watched the sunset paint the sky in warm colors, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. The station, once a place of abandonment and despair, now felt like a place of memory and transformation, a reminder of how far she had come. Jack arrived shortly after, dismounting from his horse and walking toward her. He did not speak immediately, simply offering a reassuring smile. Clara returned the smile, feeling a warmth she had not felt in weeks. "You've handled yourself incredibly well," Jack said finally. "You faced everything with courage and you've grown stronger because of it. I'm proud of you, Clara." Clara felt a surge of emotion. She had relied on herself, yes, but having someone acknowledge her strength, someone who had supported her without taking control, meant more than words could express. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it alone, not completely. But I've learned that I can face things and survive." Jack nodded, his expression gentle. "You can face anything, Clara, and from here on you'll have a choice, one that belongs entirely to you. No one can take that away from you." For the first time since arriving in the town, Clara felt a sense of true hope. She had faced abandonment, fear, and uncertainty. She had endured hardship, learned to navigate a world that had seemed cruel, and discovered a resilience she never knew she had. Now she could look forward, not backward. She could imagine a life built on her own choices, with the support of someone she trusted, and the knowledge that she was capable of overcoming any challenge. As night fell, the stars emerged in the sky, sparkling above the quiet town. Clara and Jack sat on the crate together, side by side, watching the darkness settle and the town grow still. The wind whispered gently through the station, carrying with it the faint promise of change and new beginnings. Clara felt a calm strength within her, a quiet determination that had been forged through weeks of struggle and growth. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "Ready to live, to take control of my life, and to make my own future." Jack smiled, tipping his hat with a quiet pride. "And you will. You've already begun. This is just the start." Clara looked out over the town, the train tracks stretching into the distance, and for the first time she felt not fear but possibility. She had arrived at the station as an abandoned bride, alone and uncertain, but she was leaving it as a woman who had discovered her own strength, resilience, and capacity for hope. The journey ahead was still unknown, but she was no longer afraid to face it. As the night deepened, Clara stood, brushing off her dress, and looked at Jack. "Thank you for being here, for helping me, and for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Jack nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "You did all the hard work, Clara. I just made sure you weren't alone. The rest is yours." Together they walked back toward the town, leaving the station behind. The crate remained a symbol of the past, a place of waiting, of fear, and of abandonment, but Clara no longer needed it. She had found her strength, her courage, and a sense of belonging. And as she stepped forward, she felt the first real sense of freedom and hope she had known since leaving home. The town, once intimidating and unfamiliar, now held possibilities. Friends, safety, work, and trust had been established. Clara had survived abandonment, learned independence, and embraced a future that belonged to her entirely. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, with Jack by her side, she knew that no matter what challenges arose, she would face them with courage, strength, and hope. You have a chance to build the life you deserve. Clara sat back on her crate, watching as the sun finally disappeared behind the hills, leaving the town in the gentle embrace of twilight. She realized that she was not entirely alone anymore. There was someone who cared, someone who offered protection without expectation, and that realization filled her with a cautious but undeniable hope. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Clara felt a quiet determination settle within her. She had faced abandonment, fear, and uncertainty, but she was not defeated. She had discovered resilience within herself, and she had found someone she could cautiously trust. The road ahead remained uncertain, but with Jack by her side, she felt ready to face it, step by step. And so, as the town settled into quiet night, Clara sat on her crate at the station, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks, her mind alert, and her spirit quietly determined. The future was still unknown, but she no longer faced it entirely alone.